Oh my goodness. Hello, everyone. It is Linen, and we are finally going to be diving into the Thoth symbolism here in the Major Arcana, as that is where most of the symbolism lies. Now, I'm going to use my handy dandy pencil here to kind of map out where and which the symbols are that I'll be talking about. I don't necessarily think that I'm going to do every single symbol on every single card, but we'll see. We'll see where it goes. I want to stress that some of the symbolism in some of the cards isn't going to be as heavy as the others, say like the full card. It's the very beginning of the Major Arcana. There's going to be a lots to dive in here, because this is like, it's packing a punch as the beginning. And then there's some cards that have a big punch, but may not have a lot of symbolism that goes along with it. And I want to stress that as well. There's one big disclaimer at the beginning of this video that I want to stress. The Thoth deck is about self-actualization. The whole purpose of this deck and its many symbols and its many layers is for you to dive yourself. And I do a lot of diving with this deck for my practice, for my spiritual practice, for my witchy magic practice. And I feel like the purpose of this deck isn't to learn from, like, say, if you are watching my Thoth playlist and you're trying to learn something from me, that's great. I feel like more so, instead of me being the teacher, I feel like we're all eternal students. And I feel like just gaining perspective from lots of different folks' perspective is where a lot of the study can come from, but it really does need to be about self. And you do need to, instead of just listen to me ramble, maybe come up with your own, your own perspectives and your own interpretations as to what these symbols could mean when they pop up for you. And I think that's very important to think about when learning and growing and using this deck. So it's a big disclaimer, people. But anyway, this is going to be in two parts. I'm going to do the first half of the Major Arcana and then the second half of the Major Arcana. And we'll see what we can get into with this video today. I don't know how long this is going to be. I'm just going to ramble. Now, the Fool. We're starting at the Fool. This is absolute zero, okay? It's a point of coordination here. This is the place to go forth from. That's why it seems to me that there's so many symbols here. The universe is a spiral, which I believe that's why Lady Frida Harris put this spiral here to represent the universe as moving cyclical. It states that the shape was revived by Einstein and told by Zoroaster in his oracles that's how the universe is moving. And we see that kind of in the star card as well, but we'll get that when we get there. Now, the dove here is Venus, the morning star. I feel like there's a lot to do with, there's a lot of zodiacal symbols in the Thoth deck, because I feel like that's where Crowley's practice has gone from. And I think that in terms of magic, in terms of ceremonial magic and ritual, that especially when we're talking about the lesser banishing ritual, it's mapped out via the stars. And I think that that's important to note. The butterfly, it symbolizes like the transformation of the universe. This butterfly right here, this sacred cocoon that we all are living in, this birth and rebirth that we seem to be going through. There's no death. It's the cycle of the universe as a spiral. And I think that the butterfly symbolizes that really well. Now, the crocodile, I've been asked before, what could the crocodile possibly mean? But it's an Egyptian, son of Set. So this is Sebek, I think you pronounce that. I think that symbolizes, the son of Set here symbolizes an overabundance of creativity, creative energy. And the story said that the crocodile has no means of perpetuating his species back in the day. It's a little sex magic in that this form of asexual tendency here, this form of hermaphrodism. And I think that the crocodile symbolizes that when we look back on the story of Set and Sebek. And you'll notice that he's folded here in the finds of the universe for that reason, because of again, this is all on the cyclical nature of the universe. The grapes up here are attributed to Bacchus, right? The inventor of wine, representing an ecstatic, superficial form of worship. Now, to me, that means that within that invention of wine, this ecstasy that we feel, this naivete and innocence that we feel when we're first starting out, and how I've read somewhere that divine innocence as a child grows into existential hatred, hatred that you're no longer that innocent. I love using the term weightless for the especially this full card, because he does seem to be floating here in space, like in this void. And I feel like the grapes symbolize the constant invention. We're constantly inventing things to go back to the innocence and to go back to where we didn't know anything, this bliss of ignorance here. And I think that is symbolized great. There's the Caduceus, also form of duality here. This prism here and the the pine cone, this flaming pine cone, they symbolize the All-Father, this cusp of the divine that we have manifested from, or that we are going to manifest, as the Fool has not yet manifested. The Caduceus, like I said before, is about the duality of this being like a hermaphrodite. I think that the Caduceus is symbolizing hermaphroditism here. Also, the sun here, this divine primal urge that comes along with our innocence, our ecstasy and innocence. And the tiger also symbolizes this as well. These three flowers here, also the babes go also on reproductivism. And I think that the triple head of the flower, they're in different stages of life. There's wilting, there's growing, and then there's full bloom. Okay, we're gonna move through this video without the light, the sacred light. Hopefully this is gonna be enough light for everyone to see. But I wanna move on here. I didn't want to spend too much time. Like I said, a lot of these meanings behind the symbolism you can find in the Book of Thoth. I looked at several books pertaining to the Thoth Tarot to get some of these symbols, if you will. The Magus also has some really powerful symbolism here. For me, this is all about Mercury and Hermes, hence the wings on his feet and on his head. There's lots of emphasis on the messenger here, the Magus being a messenger of sorts. And as it's the first manifestation, that makes a lot of sense. There's this monkey down here that seems to be hidden, but when Ra chose Thoth to fetch a goddess from distant lands, he was accomplishing this task devised as a baboon. And I think that when we think of Hermes and Thoth and that story of the baboon and how it was disguised, I think that is just nodding to that. A lot of these are just nods. And this could signify that he used all manners of his skills to persevere in his task, and how when we are the Magus and when we are embodying him, we must devise plans and use all of our skills to our advantage. And I think that that's the message of the Magician card in a total sense. Fun fact, there are no monkeys in Egypt. However, they have been a symbol of religion in Egypt since the 4th millennia. So that's a pretty powerful thing if you think about it, that monkeys, baboons like this one here isn't even a thing in Egypt. So it's like, where would they have gotten that symbolism? And there's a lot of things that come from Egypt that we have no understanding of as of yet. But Crowley states in the Book of Thoth that this Hanuman, or Haruman, the Hindu god that could be Mercury. So this is symbolizing all the Mercury / Hermes in mythology, and we need to look at all of their stories and figure out what the core meaning behind all of those stories are to gain perspective into the Magus card here. The Caduceus, again, there's another Caduceus on his head, much like what we saw in the Fool card. And it could represent regeneration of the mind and the will. As this first manifestation, we still need to keep that sort of duality here between good and evil. Whatever the dualistic thoughts that you tend to have as a manifestation are still relevant. There's all sorts of writing materials. There's scrolls and there's pens. I feel like he holds the stylus and the papyrus because it symbolizes his abilities as a recorder. along with being not just a messenger, but he could be a recorder of histories here. And these sacred symbols, like this chalice, the sword, this is actually one of those things that you see priests hold that has the incense in it, and the coin. I feel like all of these are the symbols of the tarot that, much like what you would see in a magician card, they've just kind of played on imagery here. There's a poem in the Book of Thoth that reveals some of these symbols, and it says, "With the wand createth he, with the cup preserveth he, with the dagger destroyeth he, and with the coin redeemeth he." And I feel like that's very powerful, again, about using the tools. I do love this projective geometry that it's going here. It really does seem to be pulling the Magus out at us. And I think that that's also a powerful scrying thing that we should look at as well. Now here's the High Priestess. Again, we see this net, but because of the cyclical spiral nature of the universe, this is also symbolizing that, but we're stuck in a net now. We're getting further into the manifestation process. Therefore, it becomes easier down the Major Arcana to get stuck in ruts, to get stuck with our own mindsets. And it is a powerful thing that she's holding us in this net of mystery, and we have to get ourselves out. And I think that that was a powerful take that Crowley took here. I think that this card is about self-sufficiency, represented by the camel here, the camel down here at the bottom of this thing that looks like the cigarette symbol. But I think the camel, it symbolizes the self-sufficiency, how he has his water on his humps. I believe that also with the fruit here at the bottom, all the sacred geometry, the prisms, the pine cone here that looks like a pine cone, these sacred anise nuts, anise and nuts, maybe these are sunflower seeds, whatever these are, it symbolizes divine femininity. This is like the very first manifestation of the feminine that we see here. And as a partner to the magician, we're seeing this divine fertility in the bottom of this card, this fertility here. A second to the magician, and how they're about to become a couple, and when they become a couple, we then see the emperor and the empress that's coming next. And there's a lot, this Isis figure here is just light. She just looks like a statue here. But I think that these spirals in the background here, that she's coveting the universe in her hands as the feminine, as the vessel here. And that's what we have to look at as well. We have to look at her sacred destruction with her bow, probably representing Diana, another form of Isis. And we just have to keep in mind that this net that she holds, it's because she's the vessel as the feminine. And I think that this was powerful when you think of it that way. Now here we have the Empress. I love that, like I said before, we see the magician and the High Priestess as like the first manifestation of masculine versus feminine that we see in the universe. This is kind of I've said this in many videos, like system thinking. But the Emperor to me is more so the feminine that we see in a human way, not necessarily a divine way. We're getting, like I said, further down the manifestation process here. And it's really about keeping the balance with the feminine. And we see that with the revolving moons here. A lot on the cyclical nature of the moon as the reflector of the sun. And I like how the tarot decks have her first, because as the vessel, if we had primal energy of the sun, right, but we don't have the vessel of the moon, and we can't contain that primal energy, then we have to be, we have to endure all this primal force of the sun, and then go looking for a vessel. And I like the idea of having the vessel first, having the love and femininity of the vessel before we have to endure the primal force of the sun, which is the Emperor. Now, I love that this is a pelican here, and she has her young. It's been said that she feeds her young with her own blood, but that's not really what happens. It's more so that her life liquid is like a pinky color, kind of like a nod back to the star card and how there's that pink, that sacred pink liquid. It just seems to symbolize even more the femininity of life-giving liquids and how we need the cycles and we need the feminine as the vessel of all the lifebloods. And I think that's just what the Pelican here represents. I love that there's sacred watercolors, not watercolor, but the color of water within the whole entirety of this. I loved embodying this on my Instagram feed. If you want to go check my Instagram feed out, I'll leave the link below. But I cosplay, if you will, some of these sacred cards, and it was very empowering. And if we looked on more like the lily here that nods back to Hinduism, and on the color wheel, red versus green, again nodding back to the duality of it, the opposition of that duality. And is it always opposite? No. These bees that she has, again, we'll see the bees more in the Temperance card, because that's just representing the divine femininity. All these symbols here, especially the zodiacal belt, it just calls back to the divine femininity. This shield here is another sovereign symbol. It's a symbol of her sovereignty as the divine manifestation of the feminine. The birds up here, there's a poem that the Book of Thoth references, and I believe that it's just a rather beautiful poem, but it's about Lesbia and her pet Sparrow, and also maybe lust. There's a lot of things in this poem. It's by Caduceus. I do believe I have it on my Google Drive file, and I will leave it below for you to read. It's very powerful. She has this pet sparrow, and she's holding it so close to her chest and loving it so hard that her future husband even grows to love the sparrow. And then when the sparrow dies from too much love, the husband is the one that mourns the bird as the friend to the wife. And it's just a really powerful way of looking at the divine feminine as the vessel, and how when we let the divine feminine go when our vessel doesn't have anything in it, and we're struck by so much femininity without the masculine to counterbalance it, then there can tend to be some caregiver shadow aspects there. And I think that Crowley was nodding to that with the birds. The lotuses down here at the bottom, even though along with the fleur-de-lis, the lotus here and the fleur-de-lis at the bottom, again represent passive power, the power of passivity. I think that this is both symbolize feminine power, the power we have as the vessel, and as the feminine power as the vessel. I want to say something else about the bees here. The bees, I guess, to me, they are associated with royalty, in my opinion, when I look at the symbolism of bees. But they're also created from the tears of the sun god Ra. So therefore, that's just yet another nod to having both, and how if the masculine cries, then as the feminine, as the vessel must catch the tears, so to speak. So that's pretty powerful. Again, there's so much other symbolism that we can mix and make new things. I think that's another powerful thing that we can do as initiates into the Thoth Tarot, is add and take away, and keep going on that journey. So here we have the Emperor, this like I said, the sacred primal force here of the masculine. And Crowley and Frida Harris did such a great job of captivating his primal energy with just color alone. Of course, there's a sacred Aries symbolism around here. And I love how he does seem to have some bees on his jacket. Again, nodding back to the feminine as a couple, as a sacred duality here. The sun is exalted here, which means that the sun is supposed to be in Aries. So it's hot and dry, almost sulfur-like. And he's in the shape of sulfur when we look at the shape of sulfur in an alchemical symbol. So there's a nod to alchemy here. But also the Leviathan's cross. And he bears the fleur-de-lis and the bees for his paternal power, nodding back to the feminine. Nodding to his paternal power as the equivalent to the maternal power of the Empress. And that's just insane. The scepter here with the ram's head on it is all his energy is established and manifesting right now. Again, the shield is on his royalty. The white light that is expressed, like that seems to be coming down back here, back behind him, this white light that beams from the back of his head, to me that is expressed for Hokmah, this creative wisdom of the number 4s, of it being on the cipher of Hokmah. Now I feel like this lamb down here is a nod to boyish masculinity, a surrendering that he must, in order to keep his control, to keep his paternal masculine power, he does need to remember where he came from as a boy in terms of masculinity, where on the hero's journey he is. Keep nodding back to that, and there's ways in which the emperor must keep his masculinity, and I love that most tarot decks have the emperor and the empress looking at each other, because really when this comes up, especially in a reading, you have to remember that they come as a pair, no matter if the empress shows up or not. And that's just so empowering. Now here's one of my favorite depictions of the Hierophant of all time. I started out with tarot hating this card because it just reminded me of the religion that I grew up in and how severe and how dogmatic and oppressing that religion was for me. I never really liked it. But all of these sacred zodiacal symbols here just call me on a divine spiritual teacher. This does actually do more for me than the Rider-Waite ever did. Even though there are a lot of good symbols in that deck as well. But let's get into it. He stands threefold, okay? He himself is Osiris. This is actually a microcosm look of the Aeon card to me, that this spiritual teacher stands in a threefold, a trinity, if you will, which is knotted here by his scepter. That is the power lies in the trinity. He himself is the Aeon of Osiris, this divine masculinity. Isis stands firm at his genitals, again nodding back to the feminine and how she's within him as well. And the Aeon of Isis stands within him. The child sits on his chest, in his heart. And this is the child of Horus, signifying that you need all three to keep moving through the aeons. And I love that. The nails in the back, these sacred nails in the back here, symbolize the Hebrew letter, which is Vow. And the picture, I guess you could goes with that Hebrew letter, is a nail. Vow means nail. And so that's symbolized back there. And he's surrounded by these elephants here. This seems to be the 2 elephants back here. I think that is a nod to Taurus. Also, Taurus, he sits on the bull. So he sits on the bull because the card is Taurus. But then we also need to think about the fixed symbols of the zodiac, which are represented by these almost like sacred masks. The card, the rose behind him, this rose back here is a nod. Also, like say this rose, and then the rose itself is surrounded by a snake, the Ouroboros, and this sacred dove right here, like here's the snake head, and then this dove has its tail. All of those are symbols of the Scarlet Woman, which we'll see in the Lust card in number 11. So, or in A211, key 11, we'll see the Scarlet Woman, but this is signifying her as well, how we need to be the Trinity here, embody the Trinity. When we find someone that embodies the Trinity, that will become our spiritual mentor, our spiritual teacher. But then we need to nod back to the Scarlet Woman and her divinity as well. You need to be divine, but then you also need to think about what is the opposite of divine. You need to think about hell, whatever that means to you. The Scarlet Woman is all about abomination, so what does that mean to you? And you need to have that represented as well when you're talking about spirituality, is the fall of man, so to speak, and what that means to you. Fun fact, this 5-petal star here, this 5-petal star behind the Hierophant, can also be a nod to Maria, as the 5-petal rose signifies the 5 joys of Mary. Annunciation, nativity, resurrection, and ascension. And I feel like that is pretty cool because it could signify the Scarlet Woman or Mary. And then in terms of Thelema, the rose could symbolize the 4 elements plus spirit. So it's just, it could mean so many things. I think that ultimately this card is a symbol of the microcosm on Earth, the divinity that we see on Earth. That's why this probably represented in a priest-like way, is because what would divinity look like if we're talking microcosm, and that would be a spiritual mentor or a teacher. And in most cases, that's probably a priest-like figure. But again, with the duality, I know that this card is all on the Trinity, but again, when we're thinking about divinity, we need to think about him being the the microcosm of divinity. But then this hexagram here, but like transparently overlaid over this whole card, represents the macro. And that's something to think about as well. Okay, here we get to the Lovers card. The Lovers, now, this and the art card in this deck, the Temperance card for the Thoth, they share a lot of symbolism, because this is the first exaltation of the Lovers as this is the most obscure way to alchemically look at a combination. So it's not fully manifested yet. The combination isn't. But we need to look at them so we know who the Emperor and the Empress are, but then we also need to see them coming together in the sacred marriage, the sacred sex act even, when we're talking about sex magic. And I think that it's important to know the difference between the masculine and the feminine, but then we also need to see them together. But we can't just go from Emperor, Empress to the Temperance card, or to the art card in this case. We have to see the transition in order to, I think, understand it better. As we see here, there's these 2 twins down here, and Crowley states that these are twins, simply put, just because this is because this is Gemini, so there's a twin aspect in the zodiac, as the zodiac represented in this card as well. But this is also Cain and Abel. This is Mary and Joseph. This is the Hierophant. There's so much going on in this card in terms of symbolism. But right off the rip, the Hebrew letter is Zain, which means sword, which are why all of these swords are, I guess, encompassing the card. It looks to be like they're doing this with the card. Really holding the card together is the Hebrew letter of Zain. And I think that that's why they're arched in the back, is some sort of like analysis here. All right, so going back to the twins here, they're, like I said, Cain and Abel. This is really Cain's initiation process with killing his brother, sacrificing living things to his own demon. And I love that when we really look, this child is holding the staff and this child is holding the chalice. And I think that this chalice and staff here represents the phallus and the vessel of the feminine and the masculine, and how each babe has its own representation into its initiation process. These flowers of life here, and the club of sacrifice, the club of killing, and how that's the ultimate sacrifice is death. I think that that's represented really good here. This massive cloaked figure, like I said, is the Hermit. We haven't seen the Hermit yet, but he stands here as the officiant, almost this silent witness to the sacred marriage. And I think that this is symbolizing ahead of time that we need to be prepared for the mystery of the universe, mystery of the sacred marriage, and what better representation, what better way to represent that than the Hermit card. And his scroll, which is, it's the same color as his robes, but I don't think it's supposed to be. It's a divine scroll around his arms here, is shrouded in the mystery as well, because you can't make out the words on it. So that's, again, symbolizing the mystery of the Hermit and the sacred marriage in total. Almost like it's telling us the unknowable. It's telling us the universe is unknowable, and we need to be open to that concept. The statues up here are Eve and Lilith, the sacred marriage of the Garden of Eden story, which which woman, it doesn't, is it for good? Is it for evil? We have to decide that. Now, Cupid is at the center here, but it doesn't necessarily have to be Cupid. It just looks like Cupid to me. And the quivers of the arrow and the quiver here says Thelema. That means will, right? Thelema means will. So this sacred Cupid, or Sagittarian-like figure, is putting forth their will. So it's like this marriage is about you, and it's again about self-actualization, but you knowing that in order to self-actualize, you have to become you have to become the duality, and no way other than to do that is the sacred marriage. The opposition of male and female symbolizes a hermetic marriage. And I think we're going back to system thinking here. This isn't necessarily male versus female. This is sun versus the moon, fire versus water, air versus earth. These basic things that we have a duality in, and that they must marry as well. And that's symbolized here again with the lion and the eagle here. This is all about integration and how the integration process is happening. Okay, let's keep going. All right, here we have the Chariot, this sacred Cancer symbol here, the cardinal sign of water. And as the sign for this card, it's talking about the path leading away from the mother Banah. I feel like that's a great representation when we think of the tree of life and this chariot in movement down this Looney Tunes tunnel, that we're going from the mother to Givarah, as understanding towards the severity of power. How are we taking the reins of power? We understand the power going from Banah, but then we're literally moving our chariot towards severity. And if we're not careful, that power that we have can manifest into an evil. And I think that's so cool to think about. The night sky above, right here, is Banah. That's symbolizing the great sky of Noit even. And the pillars that hold this up, that hold this like sacred awning thing up on the chariot, is representing the Tetragrammaton. This red chariot itself is the color of Givarah. So this is about this whole chariot here, Banah, Givarah, the pillars connecting the two. It's about that path on the tree of life. And we are in divine movement about that. Crowley states that this card layout is designed to imitate Levi's interpretation of this card, which if we read anything by Eliphas Levi, then you'll know that in his understanding, it's basically this chariot moving or in movement as number 7 down the tree of life, or through the tree of life, so to speak. So now this is drawn by 4 sphinxes, and we don't normally see that. We just see the duality here, but I think that the 4 sphinxes here, they're interchanged. Like one has a bull's head, but an eagle's body, a lion head with a sphinx head, or sphinx body. They're all intermixed, and they're not supposed to be. And Crowley states that he did this interchanged aspect of the chariot to represent all 16 sub-elements. So yeah, these might be the fixed elements here, represented by these 4 sphinxes, but he wanted to nod to all of them, all 16, not just 4. I think kind of like that in the court cards as well. There's yet another nod to all kinds of other cards in this deck that Crowley tends to do. He doesn't conduct the chariot as his own vocation. He's not driving it. His only vocation here is to hold this holy grail, this sacred prism in the center of his body. And I like that it tends to be like right here at his belly button. That could be some sacred chakra stuff happening with that as well. But anyway, the 10 stars here are Asaya, okay? Asaya is the last world in the spiritual worlds of the Kabbalah. So that's what's been represented here in the gold state for number 1 and the stars. This this last world of the Kabbalistic four worlds. And Asaya is the material world. Also, when you think of the tree of life, this is thinking about Malkuth, but this is the barest of the bare. And I think that that's really interesting when we're not even done, but we're already at the barest of the bare. And then of course the crab up here represents Cancer. Now, I want to nod back to the Holy Grail for a second, this sacred prism. It's a pure amethyst, and it said it's round for the full moon and the great sea of Banal. The center is red for the nodding of Gevarah and for the blood of life. So this is holding, this sacred amethyst here, this round amethyst, is holding the blood of life. So it's therefore the vessel of the feminine. So I think Crowley's opinion and theory is that the Holy Grail would be a vessel of the feminine. What all that is that the blood, it's the blood and juice of life. It's also Banal, the great sea, the bitterness and the destruction of her. And I think that it's nice to sit and ponder those aspects as well. Now, I also want to say that the Holy Grail, in terms of Thelema, in terms of like how Crowley interprets the Holy Grail, it contains the magical formula for the new Aeon. Probably this mathematical formula, a formula devised of all of our life liquids, whatever it may be, that's represented here by the word ABRAHADABRA. Now, ABRAHADABRA is a word that Crowley made up, and it's in the Book of the Law, that symbolizes the magical formula hidden within the Holy Grail. So that's pretty cool when I think of that. Now we have Sacred Justice. Now, to me, Sacred Justice is... I actually like how Justice is before the Strength card, because in this particular system, lust is strength, and that's something completely different than the concept that most people who read Rider-Waite-Smith have a take on it. So we're not going there today. But I love that this looks like a sacred harlequin, kind of like, to me, almost like a nod back to the Fool, a nod to magic that predates magic with a K. And Aleister Crowley was the one that actually put the K on the end of magic to differentiate between magic that was like sleight of hand magic and stage magic into a form of ceremonial magic and ritual magic. And I think that is a nod back to that naivete of stage magic and how we're going to use the magic with a K. So anyway, first, the diamonds in the background is a nod to the Harlequin. As Crowley states, she's the partner of the Fool. So this particular figure here is the partner of the Fool. So we've seen a lot of partnerships here, this divine masculine versus feminine. But this is a nod to naivete versus complete control over our senses. This severe balance that the Justice Heart card holds is... like, we look back to the Fool and we see nothing. We see this void. We see this spiral, and that's just tends to be it. But then no balance. No balance because we're ignorant of balance. But now we have balance, and there's a severity with that. I believe that's why they are partners. That's why they are almost opposite of one another. The feathers here, the feathers on her sacred cloak, are a nod to Mot, the Egyptian goddess that is all on justice and balance. And she holds the sword right here. I mean, I love how she's holding it so balanced and on the tip of her feet. She's holding the dominion over balance in the universe. I actually want to say that in the scales, there's the symbols of Alpha versus Omega. And I think that I was always confused. I always thought the opposite of an Alpha would be a Beta. But the Alpha is the primal force, but then the Omega is the vessel, right? The feminine vessel that, like, if we're talking in terms of like lion prides, then the Alpha wants the Omega female. Not the Beta female would be like his right-hand man. Not necessarily a prospective lover or procreator, I'll call it. But the diamonds also could symbolize the Vesca Pisces, passing in and out of whatever you are manifesting. The sacred the sacred Vesca Pisces that's within the 2 circles. Again, nodding back to the partnership of the Fool, how the Fool is like that point. We haven't gotten to the circle yet. And once we've done all this, symbolizing all of these like sacred balls here, I think that that's a nod to, we've already gone from the Fool to the Magician, which would be the ball, or the circle, whatever you want to call it. And it's about knowing the circle and then adding another circle and then making the diamond in the middle. That's where the balance is. And it's that dominion she holds over the balance. That's the key. I think it's about stability. Now, outside her domain, the corners here, these corners, these 2 corners and these corners, you see the circles there, the spheres there as well, represent the balance between dark and light. See, dark, light, and even here too, dark and light. There's so much severity with this balance that she has, that we are seeing the severity of her, the severity of not being naive or innocent anymore. These sacred pillars also, there's black versus, or light versus dark, however you want to call it, evil versus good. And I do believe that all these balls are representing all the things that we battle within our brains. But I'm not going on my symbolism here. Again, I really do want to tell you, as someone that's going to learn and grow and be with this deck, you need to do it for yourself. You need to sit and scry with some of these cards. If you're just doing this to pull some cards for readings, that's great. But if you really want to dive with this as a spiritual tool, then you do definitely need to dive and come up with your own reasons why Crowley and Lady Harris may have painted the cards these ways, these specific ways. Okay, last 2. Here's the Hermit. I freaking love this freaking Hermit card. I just cannot get enough of him. Now, right off the rip, we see his body shape here. This sacred whoop. That is the yod. That's the exact shape of a yod, which is the Hebrew letter for this card. And that's the first letter of the Tetragrammaton. And it represents the Father. So this All-Father here, nodding again back to the Fool. A lot of these cards nod back to the Fool as a once was, as a once thought, that they all know where they came from. And that's, again, a sacred power that we all possess, is to know where we came from. Remember who we were when we were the innocent. And that, again, there's a power that lies within that. Again, not being so ignorant. And I think that this yod of the All-Father symbolizes that perfectly. Wisdom is the highest key here. His physical form would be this spermazoid, or the spermazoom, whatever that Crowley states. He states also that the card is called the Hermit because the sperm must hermit inside the receptive mother of the Binah, which is the color red. Now, on the Tree of Life, the Binah is black. But I think that Crowley chose red, maybe Lady Harris, who knows. I think they chose red for like a virginity take. When the sperm is seated in the receptive of the vessel, the feminine vessel, there's a sense of stroking through the hymen and the lifeblood of virginity's blood as well. There's some sacred sex magic in that as well. And also the sun here on the genitalia. Okay, the sun here is on the genitalia, representing again the hermaphrodism of this card. This sacredness of the genitalia being just a big part of this deck, is the reproductive aspect of this deck. And we need to think about the reproductiveness of Earth and the universe in order to understand it better. I think fertility here is the focus. Now we see that with the spermazone, his posture, the sun at the genitalia being the primal urge of life is to is sexuality, sacred sex acts, and things like that. Again, represented here by the Orphic egg. This sacred fertility of Earth and us as humans, macro and microcosm and stuff like that. I think that there's so many symbolisms to fertility in the Hermit card that we probably wouldn't have associated with the Hermit card. Card is in the sign of Virgo, which is kind of symbolizing Earth here. Virgo, the Virgin. Again, nodding back to the red of the virgin blood here with the spermazone. But then we're also seeing the fertility in the wheat behind him, this sacred earth here, that is telling us it's not actually not so much just the act of sex or virgin sex as this is I'm talking about now, but the virgin sex of the earth. In what ways is there a virgin sex? Now, when you get a seed, like say you get a seed packet from the store and you plant it, was that first seed? No, the seed had to come from somewhere. The seed came from another plant. That was a baby of another plant. So I think that's kind of how we have to think of it too. Because the wheat is self-seeding, or the sacred grain is self-seeds continually. And I think that we get roped up into what came first, the chicken or the egg, and we're not actually thinking about the concept itself. Now, I like that Crowley states that he is the one that guides Persephone back to the land of the living. I think that this card is representing the masculine and feminine together, but then it's also a take on life versus death here. A stillness in life versus death, that and Persephone and the underworld. And I think that that's why there's a Cerberus here. This guard dog hound of hell. It nods back to the underworld and Persephone. And when we look at the reproductiveness of Earth versus the reproductiveness of humans or mammals or whatever you want to say, but then there also needs to be a life versus death take in that mentality as well. When we have those thoughts, we also need to kind of nod back to life and death and ego and self and persona and all of that. We need to have all the thoughts melded into several. It needs to be several thoughts, not just one passive thought, because that's not the nature of the Hermit, as it wasn't all the way back at the Empress. Now, I love how each head seems to be turned a different way. That's the three qualities of the lower self: speech, this dog that's speaking; action, this dog with his ears up in action, and then like they're in action here with the paws. But then this is thought, thinking back on things. So it's important to look at this in many ways. I think that's, and just to clarify that this is an ibis mask, which goes back to symbolizing Thoth, which symbolizes wisdom. There's a wisdom in the stillness. There's a wisdom in the quiet and in the silence that we must think about. Also, these shards of light here. There's a lot of symbolism with upper, middle, and lower worlds. To me, this line here is separating the tree of life line between what we're going to endure in terms of this plane of existence versus the higher plane. This being the light of Keter, or the An Sof that's above Keter in a way. And then this over here is coming from a whole different source. We need to decide what that source is. And if we even nod back to justice here for a second, it could be coming from the balance of the scales here when we look at the art together. So that's pretty interesting. Otherwise, it's just anyone's guess, really. Okay, last card that we're going to go over today, because I kind of feel like my voice is going out a little bit. Okay. A lot happening in the wheel card. This card is attributed to Jupiter. Okay, so this is the big dog, right? This is also represented by the Hebrew letter Kaf. I think that's how you say it. Kaf, K-A-P-P-H. which is symbolized by the palm of the hand, which when I think of that, I think of palmistry. And Jupiter is fortune for its incalculable factor. So there's an incalculation here. There's things that we can't calculate. That's why I tend to call this card fate or destiny, something that we can't ascertain. This unknowable, unreachable, unattainable, the factors of the universe. Anyway, the wheel has 10 spokes for the number of sephiroths on this on the Tree of Life. Also, the Sphere of Malkuth, which is the earthly plane. There's a nod to that as well. And I want to look at the Sworded Sphinx. We have the baboon, and I guess this... I'll name these guys in a minute. This Sacred Sphinx has a sword, okay, and it's piercing. Now, this line right here is the line on the Tree of Life before the Trinity. So before Keter, Binah, and Hokmah, that sacred Trinity that is unattainable on this plane of existence. But this Sphinx pierces through that. I think that's a really powerful thing to think about as well. But we have the Sphinx, Hermanubis, and then down here we have a typhoon. They are 3 alchemical symbols of a Hindu philosophy. So we have sulfur represented, and we have mercury represented, and we have salt represented. And we can go on alchemical symbolism with that as well. But I want to nod to I want to kind of talk about the lightning. The lightning always struck me in this card because there seems to be these sacred stars up here, but then they seem to be coming full force down, cloud to ground lightning here. And I think that's a nod to Zeus as Jupiter almost. And it strikes at the wheel, allowing it to turn. I kind of think that like Frankenstein almost, like the sacred electricity of the earth that keeps the earth moving. And how it can be destructive and it doesn't have to be. So that's pretty cool. Now this, I want you to see this fist down here. This sacred fist is like going like this. I think that that's a nod to Kaf, or Kaf, or whatever you want to call it, the Hebrew letter for the palm of the hand, even though we can't see the palm of the hand, again, representing the unknowable. That, yeah, we know that means the palm of the hand, but we can't see it. And that's the same thing that the wheel is trying to tell us, is that we can't see fate coming. It's just going to come. Could also mean that the hand is the hand of God turning the wheel. Again, nodding back to how we might not know the plan for ourselves, but it's there. We have to like kind of trust in the universe almost. Now there's 6 stars up here because 6 is a sacred number of the sun. So that's another nod to the zodiac here. Again, like in the middle, this right here, that also has 6 rays on it if you want to. And I think that this card ultimately just symbolizes an alchemical process that is unattainable, unknowable, and it's about knowing all the cards that have come before and how we have to have all the knowledge that has come before the wheel to allow the wheel to continue to turn. There's also some like nails back here. There's a triangle. I think the triangle nods back to a couple of other cards. The nails symbolize that it could be a nod to another Hebrew letter, but it doesn't actually say in any references that I've seen. But I think that a lot of symbols on this card, being the last one in this cycle, so to speak, as like the middle of the Arcana, so kind of like we're turning, and we now know all of this and have endured all of that has come before, but we're going to move forward now. But there has to be a wheel there, almost like a pulley system, for us to keep moving on the wheel. If there's not a wheel, we'll just be stuck somewhere on the Major Arcana. So I think that it was pretty powerful for the tarot in general to have a wheel in it. Okay, well, I hope that this was I hope that this was inspiring. I hope that some of the symbols that I talked about had you think about some things. Maybe you've got your journal out or taking notes or whatever, but I encourage you to look at some of the symbols and what may the butterfly mean to you? This sacred arrow here flying from the Caduceus to the butterfly of transformation. What could that mean to you? And really kind of sit and scry with some of these cards and get your own meanings. And I feel like Crowley would approve of you doing that. I think that he had his own agenda, but I also think that he would want you to have your own agenda as well as as an individual. And I think that do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law was his ultimate mantra. So go forth and find your own mantra. And I hope to see you for part 2. Much love.